Have you ever felt like someone or something is quietly watching over you? Like a guardian angel might be closer than you think? Today, we're diving into Miriam's captivating journey of subtle signs, unexplainable peace, and life-changing dreams. By the end of this story, you might just start noticing the extraordinary in your own life if you've ever had a moment where you felt guided or protected in ways you can't explain. Drop a dove in the comments and share your story. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. It's the best way to stay connected with inspiring content like this. All right, let's get started. Miriam sat alone in her small living room, the muted hum of distant traffic drifting in through closed windows. She had woken earlier than usual, with a strange, subtle heaviness in her chest. Yet, it wasn't entirely unpleasant, more like a feeling of being quietly observed, studied with a gentle curiosity rather than scrutiny. It seemed absurd to believe that she wasn't alone, especially as the early morning light slipped through the blinds and fell across empty chairs and quiet corners. Yet her instincts hummed with a low, persistent awareness. She had felt something like this before, long ago as a child, when she'd been certain that a kind presence hovered just beyond her sight. Back then, she'd prayed simple prayers and felt inexplicable comfort. Now, with adulthood's hardened skepticism, it was harder to accept. Still, as she sipped her tea, Miriam couldn't ignore the sensation. Last night, she had prayed earnestly for guidance. She was between jobs, her savings shrinking, and her sleep riddled with worry. But this morning there was a calmness, as if unseen arms circled the room, holding her fears at bay. She found herself whispering a soft, "Thank you," though she wasn't even sure to whom she spoke. Was it merely her imagination soothing her anxious mind? Or was something else truly here, standing watch? As the seconds passed, the unease faded, replaced by an odd sense of safety. She recalled a verse she'd stumbled upon in a friend's social media post. "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him." Could angels watch people so intimately? Was this presence a herald of something more? Miriam inhaled deeply, deciding not to dismiss it yet. She would wait and see what the day revealed. After tidying her kitchen and making a second cup of tea, Miriam tried to shake off the strange impression. The feeling of being watched over lingered, and as the morning advanced, she became more aware of subtle shifts in the atmosphere. While washing dishes, she noticed the hairs on her neck rising as if brushed by a faint breeze. When she paused to listen, the apartment was silent except for the distant hum of appliances. She couldn't help but think about angels, remembering Sunday school stories and scripture passages that felt distant and fantastical. Yet the memory of that verse kept nudging at her. As she moved into the living room, a soft peace settled over her. Miriam opened the window to let fresh air in and glanced down at the quiet street. Everything looked ordinary. Maybe she was overthinking it. Still, her heart insisted something was different. In a fit of curiosity, she pulled her old Bible from a shelf. Its pages smelled faintly of dust and ink as she flipped through Psalms, recalling that comforting line about angels encamping around believers. Just as her eyes landed on Psalm 34 verse 7, a gentle warmth rushed through her chest. The sensation was subtle but unmistakable, like a silent affirmation. Looking around, Miriam spoke softly. "If you're here, thank you. I really need guidance." She half expected silence, but instead, a quiet hush seemed to deepen. It might have been her imagination, or maybe some spirit of grace was at work. She closed the Bible and resolved not to dismiss these intuitions outright. If angels were truly guarding her home, perhaps there would be more signs. Until then, she would remain open and watchful. That night, Miriam fell asleep with a prayer on her lips. She asked for guidance, for steady work, and for the courage to trust that she was being led somehow. In sleep, her mind drifted through shadow and light until a dream coalesced before her. She stood in a vast field under a moonlit sky. Gentle figures of shimmering brightness floated at the edge of her vision. Each radiated a calm luminescence, their faces kind but indistinct. She didn't feel fear. Instead, she felt enveloped by a compassion that seemed to hum in the air like distant choir music. In this dream, one figure moved closer, And though it did not speak, Miriam sensed words blooming inside her heart. Do not fear. You are not alone. As soon as she heard this inward message, the field glowed with a soft, ivory light, flowers unfurled at her feet, petals gleaming, as if heaven itself was whispering comfort. When she awoke, her heart was thrumming gently, yet she felt no confusion. There was a tranquility lingering from the dream, as if a radiant presence still hovered in the corners of her bedroom. Sitting up, she cradled her face in her hands and remembered stories in the Bible where angels appeared in dreams, Joseph's guidance regarding Mary, Jacob's ladder reaching heaven, and others. It seemed old-fashioned, yet here she was, inspired and soothed by something beyond her understanding. She whispered a quiet, "Thank you again," feeling tears gather in her eyes. There was a warmth in her chest, a certainty that her prayer had been heard. Before sunrise, she found herself writing the details of the dream in a journal, recording every glow and kind presence so she would remember. This was no ordinary dream. She was sure of it. In the days that followed, Miriam became more attuned to subtle signs. One evening, as dusk settled, she knelt by her bookshelf searching for a volume of devotionals. Suddenly, a faint glow flickered on the far wall, as though a candle's flame had sprung to life without a source. She turned, startled. Her lamps were off, and no streetlights were angled to cast such a warm, dancing light. She moved closer, heart pounding softly. The glow shimmered gently and then faded. Later that night, while reading at her desk, the overhead light dimmed and brightened inexplicably. She checked the wiring, made sure the bulb was secure. Everything seemed in order. Yet the phenomenon repeated itself a few more times that week, usually when she was in quiet reflection or prayer. It wasn't alarming, just curious and strangely comforting, as if, somehow, light was becoming a language. She recalled the shepherds in Luke 2, startled by the glory of the Lord shining around them when the angel appeared. Of course, her experience was subtler, less dramatic, but it resonated with the idea that angels could manifest their presence through gentle illuminations. Perhaps these glimmers were reminders of something good and holy existing just beyond her senses. Miriam found herself whispering, "I see you." Whenever the lights danced unexpectedly, the odd occurrences sparked a deepening faith. She had always believed in God, but now she felt that heavenly messengers were intimately involved in her life. She couldn't fully explain it, and maybe she never would. Instead, she embraced the mystery. Each shimmering moment felt like a nod from a realm beyond her comprehension, a kindness reaching through the veil. Yes, something luminous was happening here, and she welcomed it. Late one afternoon, as Miriam cleared clutter from her dining table, a subtle fragrance drifted through the air. It smelled like lilies or perhaps roses, delicate, fresh, and comforting. She looked around, perplexed. She hadn't purchased flowers in weeks, and no scented candles were burning. The aroma lingered, transforming the ordinary room into a place of quiet grace. Miriam inhaled deeply, savoring the gentle scent. She recalled reading that divine presences were sometimes accompanied by inexplicable fragrances, though not directly tied to a specific biblical verse. The sweet aroma reminded her of passages describing incense and offerings that rose before God as a pleasing scent. It felt like a spiritual perfume, diffused just for her benefit, calming the tension in her shoulders and softening her weary heart. As the fragrance persisted, she allowed herself to believe that angels might be near. She let her mind drift to the biblical references that spoke of heavenly messengers delivering comfort. The scent felt like a quiet affirmation, much like her dream and the shimmering lights, each sign built upon the other, weaving a tapestry of gentle guidance. Later that day, when the fragrance finally dissipated, Miriam felt oddly grateful for the experience. Her home was becoming a sanctuary of subtle miracles. She whispered a prayer of thanks and wrote down the details in her journal: the time, the room, the type of scent. She didn't want to forget a single detail of these encounters. Angels, if they were truly here, seemed to be speaking to her senses in delicate ways: light, fragrance, the sense of presence. It was as if every channel of perception had the potential to reveal gentle touches from the divine world. Miriam's heart stirred with quiet awe. On a quiet Sunday evening, Miriam sat on her couch, pondering a tough decision. She had two job interviews coming up, one with a large corporate firm promising a steady paycheck, and another at a small nonprofit with uncertain funding but meaningful work. She prayed quietly, asking for guidance, seeking a nudge in the right direction. As she focused on her thoughts, she heard a faint whisper. It wasn't a sound that entered through her ears, but rather a gentle voice brushing the edges of her mind. The words were not distinct, yet the meaning was clear. Be patient. Trust. She looked around, the apartment silent. Her heart fluttered. Could this be an angelic whisper? She'd never heard such a thing before. Remembering stories where God's messengers spoke quietly, like in Elijah's encounter with the gentle whisper, she considered the possibility. This subtle communication seemed aligned with all the other signs: the presence, the lights, the fragrance. It offered no detailed instructions, but it reassured her that she need not rush or fear. She could wait, listen more deeply, and let circumstances unfold guided by divine hands. Miriam decided to keep praying about the job decision. She felt less anxious now, as though an invisible friend had placed a calming hand on her shoulder. This was new territory, heeding whispered guidance that could not be measured or proven. But her heart told her it was right. She wrote it down, heard a gentle whisper. Be patient. Trust. She marked the date and smiled softly. If angels were indeed speaking, even in this subtle, intimate way, what else might they share? Miriam vowed to remain attentive, open to quiet counsel that rose from beyond the veil of ordinary life. A few days later, a curious event unfolded. Miriam was typing an email on her laptop when the screen flickered unexpectedly. She assumed it was a glitch until it happened again. This time, her computer's wallpaper changed to a serene, cloud-filled sky she didn't remember downloading. Then her phone, charging nearby, lit up without receiving any notification. Both events startled her, as if the electronics were responding to an unseen presence. She tried to rationalize it: a software update, a power surge, but nothing else in her apartment flickered. It reminded her of how angels in Scripture could influence the physical world. The angel rolling away the stone at Jesus' tomb, the jail cell's miraculous opening for Peter. Stories that hinted at divine influence on earthly matters. These small electronic quirks might be gentle, modern echoes of that phenomenon. As Miriam touched the laptop trackpad, the screen displayed a random verse from a digital Bible app she rarely opened. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. The timing sent chills through her. She hadn't launched that app. Was it a coincidence? She looked around, amazed and grateful. She couldn't deny the pattern forming, subtle signs through her senses, dreams, and now technology. It seemed angels were using every means possible to remind her of God's presence and care. Miriam closed her eyes, whispered a thank you prayer, and accepted this wonder. The world was more layered and mysterious than she'd imagined. This technical interference made her smile, feeling cared for in a strange, personal way. She took a screenshot, saving the verse, determined to remember that angels indeed guard her paths, even if it meant bending the rules of electronics now and then. One afternoon, Miriam entered her home after a long, stressful day of running errands and enduring crowded buses. The moment she stepped inside, a remarkable calm greeted her. She hadn't realized how tense she was until that peaceful hush met her like a soft embrace. The tension in her shoulders eased, and the air felt somehow lighter. There was no visible sign this time, no lights flickering, no scents drifting about, but the presence of peace was undeniable. It was as if the room had been infused with a gentle spiritual balm. Miriam set down her bags and took a slow breath, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Peace like this didn't simply arise from silence. It carried a sense of love, safety, and purpose. She recalled the biblical promise that the peace of God surpasses understanding. Now she was living it. Though no words echoed through her mind, she sensed encouragement, as if angels surrounded her, guarding her thoughts and emotions. She let that peace settle into her weary heart. This moment felt like a private sanctuary, a reminder that life's chaos could never fully drown out divine serenity. God's messengers were ensuring that the burdens wouldn't crush her spirit. Miriam ran her fingers along the back of her couch, whispering a grateful prayer. She didn't know what the future held, whether she'd get the meaningful nonprofit job or end up at the corporate firm. But in this moment, none of that weighed her down. She simply rested, enveloped by grace. Later that evening, she recorded the experience in her journal, calling it a stillness in my home. If heaven's messengers truly graced her residence, then this deep calm was their gentle gift, a sign of divine companionship and unfailing care. On a quiet morning, Miriam sat in her reading chair, contemplating the week's events. As she pondered the subtle signs, a gentle movement of air brushed against her face. She looked up, puzzled. The windows were closed, the heating system off, yet a soft breeze stirred her hair. It was so slight and delicate, like a sigh from an unseen presence. She reached out her hand, feeling the faint current glide past her fingers. It reminded her of how Scripture sometimes likened the Spirit's presence to a gentle wind. Though the Bible didn't explicitly say angels move as breezes indoors, this moment felt like another whisper from beyond. Perhaps angels, as ministering spirits, could nudge the air as a quiet greeting. The sensation brought to mind Elijah hearing God not in the earthquake or fire, but in a still, small voice. Perhaps angels, following their master's pattern, preferred subtlety over spectacle. Miriam let a small smile curve her lips and thanked God for such delicate reassurances. To think that angels might manifest through something as simple as a shift in air gave her comfort. It suggested they were always near, gently interacting with her environment. Once the breeze dissipated, the room settled back into stillness. Miriam recorded the experience in her ever-growing journal. Each entry seemed to be building a tapestry of faith and quiet encounters, a mosaic made of tiny wonders. She found herself more attuned to holiness in the mundane. If angels could make themselves known through such a delicate sign, then perhaps all creation hummed with divine presence. Everything from fragrance to light to a subtle breeze could become a messenger's tool. With that in mind, Miriam felt more willing than ever to trust in unseen guidance as she walked her path. The following week, Miriam's prayers focused intensely on finding meaningful work. She had the interviews scheduled. One job promised steady income but felt soulless, while the other had uncertain hours yet matched her values perfectly. Before heading out for the nonprofit interview, she knelt by her bed, praying for clarity and guidance. If angels were truly guiding her, could they help orchestrate something in her favor? To her surprise, the interview went extraordinarily well. The director, a warm-faced woman named Loretta, seemed genuinely impressed by Miriam's passion for community outreach. After the meeting, Miriam left feeling buoyant. That evening, her phone rang. Loretta offered her a position, albeit part-time to start. Miriam hesitated for only a moment. This was the direction her heart had longed for, and she sensed heavenly encouragement nudging her forward. She accepted and hung up, heart pounding with joy. Had angels played a role in this perfect timing? The corporate interview was still days away, but now it no longer mattered. She'd found something aligned with her calling. She remembered Daniel in the Bible, how angels delivered answers to prayers, sometimes delayed by unseen battles. This wasn't a momentous biblical drama, but in her small life, it felt miraculous. The job offer arrived just when her savings were nearly gone, just as she nearly surrendered to fear. Grace intervened. Miriam knelt again, offering thanks. In that moment, the room felt warm and bright. Even though it was well past sunset, she understood that God's messengers didn't just protect, they helped guide events toward God's good purposes. A sense of relief and gratitude washed over her, as if invisible wings hovered in gentle blessing, ensuring she knew she wasn't alone. As days passed, Miriam immersed herself in the tasks at the nonprofit. She helped sort donations, served meals at a local shelter, and assisted with after-school programs. Despite the part-time hours, her heart felt full. She saw each small act of kindness as a way of honoring the guidance she'd received, of responding to angelic nudges. At home, the signs continued. One afternoon, she decided to study angelic references in the Bible more thoroughly. She learned how angels ministered to prophets, comforted Elijah, guided Joseph, and protected the faithful. Their presence was woven through Scripture as God's helpers and messengers. As Miriam read, she came across Hebrews 1 verse 14. Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? The words leapt from the page. She felt that service now, intimately. She had been fearful, uncertain, and lonely, yet angels had encircled her with comfort, guidance, and reassurance. They reminded her that the Creator cared about the details of her life. She marveled at how these experiences felt simultaneously extraordinary and gentle. No grand trumpets, no blinding wings before her eyes, just quiet evidence that heaven touched her world. She realized that trust, gratitude, and openness were essential. The more she trusted, the more she recognized their subtle presence. Miriam marked the verse in her Bible and decided to deepen her prayer life. She would pray not just for her own needs, but also for others. Believing angels carried these petitions upward. She wanted to be a channel of grace, just as she'd received it. Perhaps angels inspired her to love more, to serve more wholeheartedly. This realization kindled a quiet joy within her. Heavenly messengers weren't just comforting her, they were shaping her into a more compassionate human being. As her awareness of angelic presence deepened, Miriam sought counsel. She visited her church's pastor, a kind, elderly man named Pastor Thomas. She didn't share every detail, but she hinted at experiencing unusual moments of comfort and guidance. The pastor listened thoughtfully, nodding with understanding. Miriam, angels are indeed real and active, he said softly, but remember, they always point to God's glory. If their presence encourages you to trust God more, love others more, and find peace, that's a good sign. His words reassured Miriam. She realized her experiences had never felt self-serving or frightening. They always led to greater faith, hope, and compassion. The angels didn't distract her from God. Rather, they magnified his care. Pastor Thomas suggested she continue to pray, read Scripture, and remain discerning. Not every spiritual experience is from God, he cautioned. But if these signs draw you closer to the biblical truth and Christ's love, it's likely they're genuine. Miriam felt renewed confidence. She was on the right path. After leaving the church, she walked home beneath a sky brushed with pale evening clouds. She breathed in the quietness of the neighborhood, her mind drifting over what she'd learned. The angelic presence in her life hadn't come with fanfare, but it had brought steady comfort and direction when she needed it most. As she stepped through her apartment door, the familiar hush of peace greeted her once again. She paused, closed her eyes, and silently thanked God for sending helpers. In her heart, she sensed these angelic ministers had woven themselves into the fabric of her daily life, ensuring she remained anchored in grace, guided by invisible hands through every uncertainty that lay ahead. Over the following weeks, Miriam deepened her scriptural study on angels. She read about Michael and Gabriel, about angels fighting unseen battles, delivering messages of hope and prophecy. In the book of Daniel, she discovered angels responding to prayers, even when delayed by spiritual conflict. This fascinated her. Although her experiences were subtle and gentle, it comforted her to know that angelic activity took many forms. These ancient stories resonated with her personal journey. While she had not witnessed dramatic warfare in the heavens, she felt sure that angels had guarded her thoughts and guided her decisions. She remembered how Daniel prayed for understanding, and an angel came to help him comprehend visions. In her smaller life, angels seemed to help her find meaning and direction, lifting her heart when it sank into uncertainty. Miriam marked these passages, reflecting on how angels served at God's command. They weren't deities themselves, but loyal servants carrying blessings, warnings, and truths. This understanding kept her grounded. She was grateful for their ministry, but she was careful not to idolize them. Instead, their presence fueled her worship of God, who orchestrated all good things. In the evenings, she whispered prayers for wisdom, comfort, and the ability to discern God's voice amidst life's noise. She trusted that if angels acted as messengers, they would never contradict Scripture or God's character. The peace, guidance, and comfort they brought fit perfectly with the God she knew. Miriam found herself more courageous, more willing to take steps in faith. Knowing that God's servants were near gave her confidence to try new outreach ideas at the nonprofit. She felt empowered to speak kindly to strangers, to show love without fear of rejection. In small but profound ways, angels were influencing her life's trajectory. As Miriam integrated these heavenly signs into her daily life, she realized that her perspective on ordinary moments had changed. She no longer saw challenging situations as proof of abandonment, but as opportunities to trust that angels and God's grace were still working behind the scenes. At the nonprofit, when food supplies ran low unexpectedly, she prayed, trusting that help would come. Within hours, a local bakery donated leftover bread. When a child at the after-school program cried over homework troubles, Miriam knelt beside him, calmly offering encouragement. She thought of angels who ministered to the weary and realized that through her, perhaps a bit of that angelic care flowed. Not all problems resolved instantly, but she found patience blossomed in her heart. She perceived that angels didn't simply intervene to remove hardships. Sometimes their presence strengthened her to face difficulties with courage and compassion. This subtle shift in perspective felt like a miracle in itself. At home, she continued to notice gentle signs, soft lights, comforting fragrances, that hush of peace, although less frequently now. She didn't need constant reminders. Their initial abundance had laid a firm foundation of faith. Now, even subtle reassurances felt sufficient to reaffirm what she knew. She was not alone. Miriam began to thank God not just for personal blessings, but for the vast, intricate network of support He provided, seen and unseen. The angels were part of His divine tapestry, weaving grace into human lives. She respected their mystery, understanding she would never fully comprehend their work. But that was okay. Faith did not require full understanding, only trust. And trust had taken deep root in her soul, fed by each quiet sign that God's messengers had gently offered. One day, Miriam's friend Carla dropped by unexpectedly. Carla had always been practical, skeptical about anything unseen. As they sipped tea, Carla asked how Miriam's job search ended, and Miriam proudly shared her new role at the nonprofit. "You seem happier," Carla noted, her tone warm but curious, less anxious than before. Miriam smiled. She considered how much to reveal. Eventually, she described feeling guided and comforted by gentle signs, without mentioning angels explicitly. Carla listened, frowning slightly. "Sounds like you're just more positive," Carla said. "Maybe it's all in your head." Miriam nodded. She understood Carla's doubts, remembering her own skepticism before these events. "Maybe," Miriam replied softly, "but it feels real, and it's helped me." She left it at that. Later that evening, as they moved from living room to kitchen, Carla gasped. On the counter lay a single small feather, pristine and white. "Did you get a bird?" Carla asked, puzzled. Miriam shook her head. She lived on the fourth floor and had no pets. They both examined the feather. Speechless, Miriam thought of Psalm 91 verse 4, God covering His children with feathers, and smiled inwardly. She felt the quiet thrill of recognition. Another gentle sign. Carla said nothing more, but her bewildered expression spoke volumes. After Carla left, Miriam tucked the feather into her journal. She prayed that one day Carla might be open to the idea that something holy hovered at the edges of our everyday world. In that prayer, Miriam realized how angels' presence wasn't meant for her alone. Perhaps it was meant to inspire others too. Even a silent feather could awaken wonder. She felt a stirring in her heart, a desire to share hope, faith, and love with people still uncertain that unseen guardians could gently guide their paths. In the weeks that followed, a sudden crisis arose. Miriam's aunt, Teresa, fell gravely ill, and doctors struggled to find a solution. Miriam spent hours at the hospital, praying and trying to comfort Teresa, who looked frail and frightened. Amid beeping machines and hushed voices, Miriam begged God for healing. She wondered if angels roamed those sterile halls, ministering to patients and families. Late one night, as Teresa slept fitfully, Miriam sat by her bedside reading Psalms softly. A subtle sense of presence washed over her, familiar and reassuring. She didn't see or hear anything unusual, but the memory of angelic signs at home steadied her. If angels could guard her apartment, surely they were capable of hovering here, too, bringing Teresa comfort in ways human medicine could not. During a quiet lull, Miriam held her aunt's hand and whispered, "You're not alone, Annie. God's with us. His angels watch over you." Although Teresa was too weak to respond, a tear slipped down her cheek. Miriam hoped that was a sign her words reached Teresa's heart. In the stillness, Miriam recalled Daniel protected in the lion's den by an angel who shut the lions' mouths. Though this situation was different, she prayed for a similar intervention. If angels could guide her to the right job, surely they could stand guard by this hospital bed. The heavy scent of antiseptics and the whirring machines contrasted starkly with the gentle spiritual assurances she carried inside her. Miriam clung to faith, trusting that angels worked invisibly. She felt certain they stood around Teresa's bed, not removing all suffering, but strengthening souls for the battle. In that moment, Miriam experienced love as a shield, something angels might hold aloft, a promise that even in pain, they would not abandon her family. Pause for a second. If you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, like a sudden sense of calm or a sign that felt almost otherworldly, type "I believe" in the comments. What do you think Miriam's dream meant? Do you believe it was a message, or just her subconscious trying to comfort her? I'd love to hear your take. That night, Miriam slept in a vinyl recliner beside her aunt's bed, drifting into a restless slumber. She dreamed again. In this vision, she stood in a quiet garden filled with lush greenery. A figure approached, a shimmering presence indistinct, yet radiating calm. Without words, the figure extended a hand toward Miriam's heart, and she felt comfort flood her soul. She intuited a message: "Your prayers are heard. Do not be afraid." Miriam woke with tears on her cheeks. The hospital's stark reality returned, yet the dream's reassurance lingered. She looked at Teresa, who was now breathing more evenly, her face more relaxed. It might have been the medication or a natural shift in her condition, but Miriam believed the angels had played their part. Recalling the angelic dreams of Joseph, who received guidance in his sleep, Miriam took this experience as confirmation. Angels often communicated in subtle ways, through dreams, gentle whispers, quiet encouragement. Each sign aligned with biblical truths. Angels served God's children, reminding them of his nearness. Miriam stroked Teresa's hand and prayed silently. "Thank you for sending comfort. Please help her heal." She imagined angels gathered around the bed, perhaps placing their unseen hands over Teresa, infusing her with hope and strength. The doctors still had no definitive answers, but Miriam's faith held steady. She trusted that angels guarded this room as faithfully as they did her home. The knowledge gave her courage to face uncertainty, believing that divine help did not vanish in the shadowy corners of crisis. Instead, it shone brightest there, illuminating hearts with warmth. As dawn broke, Miriam rose to greet the new day, heart anchored in that angelic promise. Teresa's health began to improve incrementally. Her fever lessened, and tests hinted at a possible treatment plan. The doctors didn't call it a miracle, but Miriam knew better. She sensed a divine hand at work, guided by unseen messengers. One afternoon, while Miriam sat alone in the hospital room, a gentle fragrance filled her senses. It reminded her of that sweet aroma at home. No flowers were allowed in this ward, yet a light, rosy scent lingered. Teresa stirred and opened her eyes, smiling faintly at Miriam as if to acknowledge something beautiful was near. Miriam said nothing about angels to the nurses, but she held this sign close to her heart. If angels could manifest at home through fragrance, why not here? Offering comfort amidst the scent of antiseptics? Teresa whispered weakly, "I feel peaceful." Miriam blinked back tears, nodding. She had prayed for this very thing. She thanked God silently, praising his willingness to send ministering spirits to a sterile hospital room. In her mind, Miriam pictured angels tending her aunt's bedside like gentle nurses of the soul, their presence invisible but potent. This inner vision anchored her faith, just as the fragrance hinted at their nearness. Her aunt's slight improvement felt like a response to their quiet labor. That evening, Miriam stepped into the corridor, feeling the weight of recent days lift from her shoulders. She passed other patients' rooms and wondered if angels hovered in each one, responding to whispered prayers, carrying comfort where it was needed most. The possibility filled her with awe. She had learned that angels weren't distant relics of ancient stories. They were active participants in the unfolding drama of human life, especially where faith and love found expression in the face of suffering. A couple of days later, Teresa was stable enough that the doctors discussed a discharge plan. Miriam arrived early to help. As she smoothed the hospital linens, she noticed a small white feather resting on the pillow next to Teresa's head. Her breath caught. No open windows, no birds, no reason for a feather. Yet it lay there, delicate and pure. Gently, Miriam picked it up and placed it in Teresa's hand. Teresa looked confused but smiled. "A little gift?" she asked, voice still weak. Miriam nodded, eyes glistening. This feather reminded Miriam of the one found in her kitchen. She was certain it was another sign, an affirmation that angels had been near all along, guarding Teresa's recovery. Scripture often used feathers metaphorically for God's protection. Miriam's heart soared with gratitude that these subtle signs continued to confirm divine care. Teresa didn't know the full story behind the feather, and Miriam chose not to explain just yet. She wanted her aunt to focus on healing and rest. But deep inside, Miriam recognized a gentle pattern. These simple tokens, a fragrance, a whisper, a feather, wove together a powerful testimony of love. As Teresa's discharge approached, Miriam packed her aunt's belongings with reverence, including that white feather. She prayed silently that Teresa's time here would leave her with renewed faith and trust in God's tender mercies. Miriam believed angels had left a calling card, so to speak, a subtle reminder that Teresa's life mattered to heaven. Later, as they left the hospital, Miriam couldn't help but smile. Even in difficult places, the message was consistent. You are not alone. Angels had demonstrated their gentle presence, reflecting God's protective wings over both of them. After Teresa's discharge, Miriam returned home, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, reading a passage from the Gospels. She asked God for direction in her next steps. She wanted to do more at the nonprofit, perhaps start a new program. Yet uncertainty nagged at her. Would resources be available? Would volunteers come? As she prayed, a quiet voice seemed to whisper in her mind, "Take heart. Proceed with faith." The words were gentle and clear, resonating with the scriptural assurances she knew. She looked around, half expecting to see something luminous. Nothing visible appeared, yet the whisper remained in her heart. It guided her toward courage. Recalling that angels communicated in subtle whispers, Miriam embraced this confirmation. She decided to propose a new community literacy project at the nonprofit. Though unsure how to fund it, she trusted that the same angels who guided her so far would help open doors. She wrote down her idea, crafting a plan to present to Loretta. At that moment, her phone screen lit up unexpectedly, no notification, just the home screen. But that small flicker felt like a nod, a reminder that divine helpers were close. Miriam chuckled softly, grateful for these constant reassurances. She closed her eyes, thanking God and his angels for their guidance. She might have once dismissed such occurrences as coincidence, but too many patterns had formed a beautiful mosaic of faith. With each angelic nudge, her confidence grew. Now, each decision felt supported by invisible allies. Her fear diminished, replaced by a peaceful determination. If angels watched over her, she could move forward with bold kindness, turning faith into action and offering hope to those who needed it most. A week later, Miriam presented her literacy project idea to Loretta at the nonprofit. Loretta listened attentively and smiled, agreeing it had potential. However, the organization's budget was tight, and Loretta advised seeking outside donations or grants. Miriam left the meeting with mixed feelings. She believed in the idea, but lacked experience in fundraising. That evening, as she struggled over her laptop researching grants, her screen flickered again. Startled, she checked for updates, none. Then a random webpage refreshed to display a quote, "With God, all things are possible." Miriam's eyes widened. It was as though angels were confirming she shouldn't give up. Encouraged, she continued her search, and within an hour found a local foundation specializing in educational projects. She took notes, feeling hopeful. Later, as she rested on her couch, she reflected on how angels seem to leverage modern tools to deliver reminders. Earlier, it was a Bible verse on her phone screen. Now, a timely quote appearing amid her research. Such gentle interventions felt personal, like a friend tapping her shoulder, whispering, "Keep going." She prayed for guidance, trusting that angels would help align circumstances. If these signs had taught her anything, it was that perseverance partnered with faith often yielded results. Over time, she had learned to be alert for gentle nudges. Angels didn't announce themselves with fanfare. They inspired persistence, faith, and hope through subtle messages. Miriam closed her laptop, heart lighter. She would apply for the grant, trusting God's messengers to guide her through the process. Even if obstacles arose, she knew she wasn't alone. The same loving presence that helped her choose the right job and comforted her aunt in illness would also support this new endeavor of service and love. As time passed, Miriam noticed a shift in her inner landscape. Worries that once knotted her stomach now yielded to a quiet peace. Even when challenges arose, like uncertainty in securing funding, she sensed calm faith. The presence she had come to associate with angels still infused her home, though it no longer startled or puzzled her. Instead, it felt as natural as sunlight. One evening, she turned off the TV and sat in silence, basking in an atmosphere that felt almost holy. It was as if angels hovered quietly, their wings never seen but always felt. She imagined them as guardians who had always been there, but now she finally saw their influence. As she prayed, her heart overflowed with gratitude. She thanked God for the angels who had guided her through each sign, the dream that first brought comfort, the subtle lights and fragrances, the soft whispers and timely messages, the feathers appearing at just the right moments, and the surge of peace in difficult times. She understood that angels were part of a heavenly chorus singing God's love into creation. They had helped shape her into a person who trusted more deeply, served more readily, and looked at life with hopeful eyes. She prayed for wisdom to continue discerning their gentle guidance. Though Miriam knew not everyone would believe her experiences, that no longer mattered. She had grown confident in what her heart knew. Peace and love testified to truth. She embraced this understanding fully, allowing angels' silent ministry to refine her soul. After her prayer, she opened the window and looked at the stars. They shimmered like distant lanterns. She imagined angels moving among them, yet their influence also dwelt right here, in the simplicity of her earthly home. Encouraged by her angelic experiences, Miriam invited Carla over again, this time intending to share more openly. Carla arrived, curious but cautious. Over tea, Miriam bravely recounted the signs, dreams, fragrances, feathers, whispers, the subtle lights. She watched Carla's face shift from skepticism to wonder. "I know it sounds unbelievable," Miriam said, smiling. "I never would have imagined these things myself." She showed Carla her journal, filled with dates, descriptions, and Bible verses. Carla flipped through it, eyes growing thoughtful. She saw consistency, not random coincidences. Miriam prayed silently for Carla to receive even a spark of faith. Unexpectedly, as Carla sipped her tea, a gentle breeze stirred a loose strand of her hair. Carla glanced at the closed windows and frowned. Then she noticed Miriam's calm, expectant smile. "Another sign?" Carla asked quietly, her voice softer now. "Perhaps," Miriam replied. "Maybe angels want you to know this is real." Carla took a shaky breath, tears gathering. "I've always dismissed this kind of thing, but now I feel something peaceful," Carla admitted. She looked around as if expecting to see someone. Miriam reached for her friend's hand. You don't have to understand it all right now. Just know that God cares deeply for you too. Angels minister to everyone, often unseen. As they sat in gentle silence, Miriam recognized a holy moment. She prayed that Carla's heart would open, that skepticism would yield to gentle belief. Even if Carla never fully embraced the idea, this moment planted a seed. In that quiet afternoon, two friends shared a sense of awe. Miriam realized that angels not only guided her personally, but could also become a bridge for others, leading them from doubt to hope, from fear to trust. Over the following days, Carla texted Miriam, asking more questions. Although still unsure, Carla admitted feeling curious and uplifted by their conversation. Miriam prayed for the angel's influence to continue touching her friend's heart. She knew faith was a journey, and angels often worked quietly, respecting human freedom. In time, Carla joined Miriam one evening at a local community outreach event. While helping serve dinner to homeless guests, Carla paused and wiped tears from her eyes. "I feel so connected, like we're doing something that really matters," she whispered. Miriam placed a comforting hand on Carla's shoulder. She knew that angels often inspired acts of love. If Carla felt moved to compassion, perhaps heavenly messengers were gently guiding her too. Carla looked around at the volunteers, the grateful faces of those receiving a meal, and said softly, "Your stories, Miriam, maybe they helped me see things differently." Miriam's heart soared. Angels never demanded belief, they invited it. Through small signs and acts of kindness, faith blossomed. That night, as they left the community center, Carla commented, "I don't know if I believe in angels like you do, but I believe there's something good, something bigger at work here." Miriam smiled and nodded. That was enough for now. Miriam recalled Psalm 91 and how angels guard us in all our ways. Perhaps today, angels guarded Carla's heart, leading her closer to hope. Faith didn't need to arrive in a blaze of certainty. Sometimes it entered quietly, through a crack in the door of doubt. As they parted, Miriam thanked God for using her testimony and these subtle angelic signs to touch Carla's life. The tapestry of faith continued to unfold, thread by gentle thread. Miriam's confidence in angelic guidance continued to grow. With perseverance, she applied for the educational grant. While she waited for a response, she poured her energy into existing programs. Over time, her gentle leadership caught the attention of colleagues and volunteers. Some remarked that Miriam seemed unusually calm and wise beyond her years. In reality, it was faith and angelic nudges at work, shaping her into a vessel of kindness. She considered how angels might be orchestrating connections. A volunteer with a background in literacy education approached her, eager to help with any reading initiatives. Another supporter offered to donate books. Opportunities aligned as though guided by an invisible hand. One morning, Miriam received an email. The foundation approved her grant proposal. Stunned and grateful, she thanked God and his angels for helping her navigate these steps. She felt a swelling joy. The literacy project would become a reality, bringing hope to children struggling with reading. That afternoon, as she sat in her living room, a gentle fragrance of lilies drifted once more. The timing felt like a celebration, a divine "well done" for her efforts. Miriam smiled, tears of gratitude gathering. All the subtle signs, dreams, fragrances, feathers, and whispers had nudged her along this path. They had shown her that the divine realm cared about ordinary lives and simple acts of love. Angels didn't just protect, they inspired, guided, and encouraged. As she recorded the grant approval and the fragrance in her journal, she realized how far she'd come. Fear and doubt had given way to trust and purpose. The angels had made her world richer, infusing her daily life with meaning and gentle wonder. A few weeks later, Miriam met a neighbor named Jonathan, a single father struggling with his daughter's dyslexia. He'd heard about her new literacy program and wondered if it could help. Miriam assured him it would be open to all children needing support. As they chatted by the mailboxes, Miriam felt a familiar, gentle warmth. She sensed that angels might have guided Jonathan's steps to her doorstep. Sometimes human encounters felt divinely arranged. She invited him and his daughter to an orientation session. During that meeting, The child's anxious face softened as Miriam gently introduced books and creative exercises. Miriam saw how a subtle presence, like a hush of peace, settled over the small group. She recognized that angels might be working here, nurturing trust and hope. Jonathan seemed relieved. Thanking Miriam quietly, she responded with a smile, silently praising God for sending people who needed help. Each encounter confirmed that angelic guidance wasn't limited to comforting her alone. It extended outward, rippling through her life into others' hearts. That evening, as Miriam reflected on the day, she realized that her home and her efforts had become conduits for blessings. Angels had first touched her life privately, but now, the fruits of their influence spilled into the community. She remembered the Bible verse about entertaining angels unawares. Perhaps by responding to these nudges and offering kindness, she was also welcoming their presence more fully. It comforted her to know that every kind act might align with their gentle work. She prayed that God would continue to use her, guided by angelic whispers, to uplift those who crossed her path. One afternoon, Miriam received a phone call from her estranged cousin, Adele. They hadn't spoken in years due to a family misunderstanding. Adele's voice trembled as she asked if they could meet. Without hesitation, Miriam agreed. They met in a quiet cafe, sunlight streaming across their table. Adele confessed her regrets, acknowledging past hurts. Miriam listened with compassion, heart softened by all she'd learned. She recalled how angels guided people toward reconciliation, like how Joseph eventually forgave his brothers. Perhaps angelic influence had nudged Adele to make this call. Tears flowed as they spoke honestly, seeking to mend old wounds. Miriam felt a gentle, calming presence. She realized angels might be at work here, creating an atmosphere of understanding and love. The cafe's hum softened, as if all other sounds receded, leaving room for healing words. They parted with embraces and hopeful smiles. A weight lifted from Miriam's chest. She hadn't anticipated this renewal, but it felt like another gift aligned with the signs of angelic presence. Each encounter seemed more interconnected. Her life was becoming a tapestry of gentle miracles. Back home, Miriam prayed, thanking God for angels who encourage forgiveness. She understood that their role isn't just to protect or guide career steps, but also to facilitate reconciliation. Healing relationships could be another manifestation of divine care. Miriam marveled at how far she'd come, from anxious uncertainty to a life touched by peace, purpose, and restored connections. Angels had quietly influenced each stage, strengthening her faith and helping her nurture a more loving heart. She realized that through her own transformation, she could be a vessel of grace for others. As Miriam's awareness of angelic presence grew, she began to see these quiet blessings as part of her life's mission. She realized that every subtle sign, every whisper, fragrance, feather, or moment of peace had led her toward a fuller understanding of God's love. Angelic guidance had not just improved her circumstances, it had molded her character. She embraced new opportunities at the nonprofit, watched the literacy program take shape, and listened attentively to the stories of those she served. Now, when troubles arose, she prayed confidently, expecting that angels still moved invisibly, aligning people and resources for good. Miriam's apartment felt like a sanctuary, a place where heaven touched earth. She found that her own gratitude and kindness seemed to amplify the peace within those walls. Guests often commented on how calm and comforting her home felt, though they couldn't explain why. Remembering Pastor Thomas's advice to focus on God's glory, Miriam ensured these experiences always pointed her heart back to God. Angels were his servants, faithful and humble. The more she recognized their quiet interventions, the more she worshiped the Lord who commanded them. In quiet reflection, Miriam realized she wanted to share this sense of divine care more broadly. Perhaps she could start a small prayer group in her home, inviting neighbors and friends to seek faith together, to learn about God's love and the subtle ways angels minister. She smiled, picturing others encountering that gentle hush of peace, that subtle glow of hope. Yes, that would be her next step, to spread encouragement. She trusted angels would be there too, weaving unseen threads of love and unity among those who entered. Miriam longed to help others recognize the extraordinary within the ordinary, guided by heavenly hands. On a quiet evening, Miriam hosted her first prayer gathering. A handful of neighbors and friends, including Carla, formed a small circle in her living room. They came from different backgrounds and beliefs, some curious, others seeking solace. Miriam began by reading a simple psalm and inviting everyone to share what they hoped to find. One neighbor mentioned seeking peace amidst job stress. Another desired healing for a friend. And Carla admitted she wanted to understand Miriam's faith better. As they prayed and talked, a sense of calm suffused the room. Miriam noticed a delicate shift in the air, a soft warmth wrapping around the group. Eyes closed, they sat in companionable silence. She had felt this presence before, angels guiding hearts toward trust and unity. No dramatic miracles occurred that night, but when the group dispersed, several people commented on how comforting the atmosphere had been. Carla whispered, "I can't explain it, but I feel lighter." Miriam smiled, grateful that these gentle signs touched others now, not just her. After the guests left, Miriam stood alone, thinking how far she'd journeyed since first sensing that quiet presence. This prayer group was a new beginning, a collective space where angels might encourage faith and open hearts. She felt certain that tonight was another strand woven into the tapestry of subtle wonders. Miriam's life had been transformed through angels' gentle guidance. She learned that faith needn't rely on grand spectacles. God's messengers often worked quietly, illuminating pathways, whispering reassurance, and fostering peace. Now, that grace overflowed from her private realm into a community seeking hope together. As the seasons changed and Miriam continued her work, her understanding of angelic presence deepened and matured. She no longer needed constant signs. The memory of them enriched her faith. The angels had introduced themselves through gentle cues, guided her through uncertainty, and helped shape her into someone who could pass that comfort on to others. In her home, the hush of peace remained. Occasionally, a soft glow still caught her eye or a sweet fragrance drifted by, reminding her that angels were near. She knew they always had been, perhaps always would be, at God's command, protecting, guiding, and encouraging God's children. Miriam reflected on the Bible verses she'd read, the dreams she'd experienced, the subtle lights and fragrances, the quiet whispers, and the perfectly timed interventions. Each element formed a testament that heaven and earth coexist in mysterious harmony. She was neither saint nor prophet, just an ordinary person whose heart opened to extraordinary grace. With gratitude, she embraced her calling to help others see that love and faith transcend the visible world. Inspired, she expanded the literacy program, saw Carla grow in empathy, and watched her community draw closer in understanding. In the gentle quiet of one final evening, Miriam whispered a prayer of thanks. "Thank you, God, for your angels who have guarded and guided me. May their presence continue to inspire love in all who seek you." A subtle breeze, as if in answer, stirred the curtains. She smiled. This was the truth she carried forward. Angels dwell among us, leaving hints of heaven's care in the fabric of daily life. Through their quiet ministry, Miriam had discovered that she was never alone, always cherished, and eternally watched over by grace. Isn't it incredible how subtle signs can weave together to create a story so deeply personal yet universal? Miriam's journey reminds us all to stay open to the mysteries around us. So now, I want to know, what are the little miracles you've noticed in your life? Let's start a conversation in the comments. If this story touched your heart, share it with a friend who might need a reminder that they're never alone. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing community of believers and seekers. Until next time, remember, even the quietest moments can hold the loudest truths.